Welcome back to another episode of Podcast on the Brink. This week, once again, we have a first-time guest on the show. And as I asked Griffin Gonzalez to come on this week's episode of Podcast on the Brink, I was kicking myself a little bit that I didn't have him on the show before when he was an IU student. But now he has graduated from the IU Media School, where he was a standout the last several years, did a great job there in Bloomington. Now he has moved on, is at WDRB Sports in Louisville, where he's going to get the opportunity this season to cover three of the really household names in terms of programs in college basketball: Louisville, Kentucky, and Indiana. Griffin Gonzalez, welcome to Podcast on the Brink.
Thanks, Alex. Excited to be here. Love your stuff at Inside the Hall. The running joke I have is, I followed a few accounts like the first day I got Twitter when I was like 13 years old. I think it was Inside the Hall, Rick Bozich, Indiana basketball, and Jeff Rabjohns. I think those were the four accounts I first followed when I got Twitter. So I've been following you guys for a while, and excited to hop on with you.
So we talked a little bit before, I hit record here, and I told you we're going to do a buy or sell episode here, and I've got some topics IU basketball related. But first, I just wanted to ask you what the experience was like as a student getting to cover all the sports that you did in Bloomington, and maybe how that experience prepared you for what you're doing now in your first year as a professional.
Yeah. I knew in high school, I went to a high school where we had a high school radio station in Indianapolis, and I knew I wanted to do this. I knew I wanted to cover sports. I knew I wanted to probably be a TV sports reporter and do sports anchoring and do high school sports down the road. So I knew that was in my wheelhouse. I knew I wanted to go to a school where I could get a lot of reps. Broadcasting is a lot like sports, where you got to practice it and you got to get good at it. You got to get comfortable in front of a camera. You got to get comfortable on a microphone. So I wanted to go to whatever school I could get as much practice as early on as possible. And I sat down with Galen Clavio, who's of course the guy in charge of all of IU sports media at the media school. And he just sat me down and gave it to me blunt. He's just like, you'll be covering sports from day one when you step on this campus if you want to, but you have to want to. And I just kind of loved that. So IU was always a hometown school to me. My mom's side of the family's from Bloomington, so it's kind of like a homecoming for me. I came to Bloomington, and they had me covering a women's soccer practice before I even moved into my dorm. So Galen Clavio is a huge thanks to that. He lived up to the promise and never really stopped. 4 years at IU, covered Indiana football for 3, Indiana basketball for 2, Indiana men's and women's soccer back and forth. Just could not ask for a better place to not only get practice, but also, there's no place better. I think I've been to a lot of college campuses. There's nothing like Indiana. It's best combination of fun and good school and good, just great place to be. And the people are phenomenal. So I would not be able to land the job I have with WDRB in Louisville, which is an amazing station in itself, without the help of Indiana and giving me the experience they did. So I'm thankful. Man, I miss it. I'm not going to lie. I love, what's great about Louisville is I still get to cover a little Indiana here and there. So I get to come visit a lot. So that's the good thing. But, it just excited and super thankful for my time at IU.
One thing you didn't get to cover at Indiana was very much success in men's basketball. Obviously, last season, the Hoosiers get back to the NCAA tournament for the first time since 2016. They need that late rally in the season really to salvage things. And obviously, we know the story of them beating Michigan and Illinois in the Big Ten tournament, ultimately punching their ticket. And now the expectations for this team are really on a different level than what we've seen in quite a long time. The highest Ken Palm preseason ranking for IU basketball since the 2012-13 season, which, as we know, that was the Old Depot Zeller year where Indiana made it to the Sweet 16 and lost to Syracuse. But a lot of expectations for this team. And for this episode, I wanted to throw out 6 different kind of statements, and I want to get your opinion if you buy or sell these statements, and you can explain it in depth as you want. I'm probably going to give my takes on some of these as well, but just to kick it off here, we'll go big because this has kind of been a preseason theme for this program as we've gone through the preseason. Are you buying or selling Indiana as the Big Ten regular season champion this year in men's basketball?
I'm glad you said that regular season thing. I am buying that. I look at the schedule. I look at where the Big Ten is this year. There's going to be a point in time where they're just going to, they might not be on Ken Pom might not project them to lose more than one in a row, but there's going to be a period of schedule. This is how the Big Ten works. You're going to drop 2 or 3 in a row. We've seen this Indiana team do it too many times. And I'm specifically looking at one area of the schedule that I think might be difficult. You got a kind of stretch of Wisconsin, Illinois, Michigan State. 2 of those 3 are at home, but 3 tough teams back to back to back in a matter of less than a week. So it's going to happen. That being said, I think the Big Ten is, I don't want to say down this year. They're still going to be decent, but I think Indiana has a pretty good home and away schedule that is conducive for them winning a Big Ten title. Now, that being said, this is going to be a competitive Big Ten year where I don't think we're going to see a Big Ten team win 15 and run away with the Big Ten title. I think it's going to be more in that 10 to 13 range as far as wins go. But I really think this Indiana team has what it takes to be the top dog in the Big Ten. I'm excited to see what we see from Illinois. They brought in a lot of transfers, a lot of really good transfers, and they've been killing it in the transfer market as of late. So I'm excited to see what they do. Michigan State's always going to be tough, and Iowa is going to be good once again. So excited to see what they do with that. I know the Illinois is going to be a 2-off, and we haven't seen them play a home and away in a while with that team. And the other Assembly Hall is difficult to win in. So excited to see how it stretches out. But right now, I would say yes, Indiana would be the favorite for me. And I think we'll definitely know 10 games into the season where those odds are.
I picked Indiana to finish second in the Big Ten, so I'm going to have to sell this one. And that's not because I'm down on this team for any particular reason. In fact, I think they're going to be much better than last year. My reasoning, I think Illinois has a little bit more of an advantageous schedule in terms of some of the double plays. I think one thing that kind of hurts Indiana, I think they only play Nebraska and Minnesota once. If they were playing those 2 teams twice, I would maybe feel a little bit better about their chance to win the Big Ten. I do think the Ken Pom projection is 13 wins in the Big Ten. Indiana won 9 last season. That's a 4-win jump. That's a pretty big leap. There's a lot of question marks for me just in terms of who makes shots from the perimeter. That has been a problem now for basically every season since Tom Crean was let go in Bloomington. I think Indiana's going to be a really good team, but I'll sell them as the Big Ten champion. So we'll disagree on that one, but I will say it wouldn't surprise me if Indiana wins the Big Ten. It's just hard for me with kind of some of the question marks I still have about this team entering the season to pick them to win in the preseason. The next one I think is pretty tricky too, because the AP poll came out this week for the preseason, and Indiana's number 13 in the country. You look at where they were last season, finishing up, I think, 48th in Ken Pom. I don't think any of the computer rankings had them in the top 40 or top 35 when the season ended. So for them to go from what they were last year to a top 13 team, I probably would have had them in the 18 to 25 range in the poll to start the season. But this question is by season's end. Do you buy them as a top 13 team, Griffin? Buy or sell Indiana as top 13 in the country in the last AP poll by season's end?
This is tough because if you look at last season, this preseason, Memphis was at 12 and Oregon was at 13. Alabama was at 14. So this is kind of a weird area where I think the AP likes to put teams that they think are going to be pretty good, but they haven't been completely sold on. Because if they were completely sold, they'd probably be in the top 10, given the Indiana brand, the Indiana status of players, the fact they have Trace Jackson Davis, one of the best returning players. I think a lot of people, like myself, are waiting to see, okay, what's this starting five going to look like? How good is Jalen Hood-Schifino going to be year one? And what level is Trace Jackson Davis going to be at? Is he going to be better than what we saw last year, or just a continuation? A continuation would be fine, but if he's better, that's going to make this team better. So I'm excited to see exactly, like I said, the first 10 games of the season, a lot of them are, competitive. There's Xavier, there's North Carolina, there's, you have Big Ten games with Rutgers and Nebraska, you have Arizona. Those are the kind of games where we're going to get to really kind of see, okay, where is Indiana at? My guess is Indiana will probably bump up a little bit after a win against Xavier, and then bump up even more against North Carolina, and then might come back down to earth with Arizona and Kansas, back-to-back games. That's going to be tough. But when I look at it as a whole, I do think they have the possibility to be a top 13 team. But it goes back to, Mike Woodson said this over and over again at Media Day. We have proven nothing. And it's true with Indiana. They have not proven anything. They have a good roster with a lot of depth, but they also, keep in mind, this was a team that probably wasn't going to make a tournament had they not gone on that Big Ten tournament run at the end of last year. And that showed with where they had Indiana even after the Big Ten tournament run, that they did not have Indiana in. So I think they're going to be good. I think we could be talking about a team that's going to be, I talked about that middle of the year Big Ten slump that every team seems to go on in the Big Ten. I could see them dropping as low as 20, 21. I don't know if I see them dropping out of the poll completely, unless there's an injury, unless there's something serious, which knock on wood. But I think they are definitely a top 20 team. Top 13, I think they're going to flirt with at the beginning of the year, fall out of, and then try to get back up to at the end of the year. But that's kind of how I see the season projecting with the schedule. But I do think as of right now, yes, they are a top 15 team in the country, but we'll see how that progresses.
You mentioned something interesting there in terms of Mike Woodson saying they hadn't proven anything at Media Day. I'm just curious, from the job that you have to do, what's it been like covering a coach like Mike Woodson, who gives all these great sound bites and honest answers coming from what Indiana had before, and Archie Miller? It's a totally different personality. I'm just curious how that maybe changed your job when you're putting together TV packages and trying to report on the program. Having somebody like Woodson has to be a little bit refreshing when you get the honesty in some of the quotes that he gives.
I love it. I would say, Woodson is very similar to, it's funny, Kenny Payne. They are both very similar in the fact that they're not going to BS you. They're not going to give you the standard coach speak if they don't want to. They're going to tell you how it is. They're going to tell you how they think the team played. They're going to lay it out on the table. And that's the kind of coach I enjoy interviewing, because, I don't want, and you can throw Coach Calipari in there the same way. Coach Cal doesn't care what the media thinks. So, it's nice. I feel like what was so challenging with Archie, it was just kind of like everyone in the room knew what the problem was, but the only person in the room who didn't want to talk about it was the head coach. And it was kind of just like constant, we went to a press conference with Archie Miller. I was like, man, I could have just used last week's press conference for this, and it's tough. And it just kind of, when you go to an Indiana press conference now, you have a feeling when you're hearing from the head coach, you're hearing from a head coach who wants to be there. You're hearing from players who want to play for this head coach, and what the quotes just align, and the vision is aligning. And that's why I think this Indiana basketball team is going to be successful this year, is because I think there's a shared vision for where they want to go. And there's a shared idea for where they want to go. And I think that's a big reason why Mike Woodson has been successful. He's been able to create that vision and have players buy into it, which is the hardest thing to do as a Division I head coach. When you have players who are all over the place, you got a lot of personalities, you got a lot of NIL money now. Getting players to buy into a team idea and a team vision is difficult. And we saw that, Archie Miller's a good coach. Our Archie Miller struggled with that. And Mike Woodson's been able to come in and kind of first start off with building a culture. We saw that a lot last year, almost to a fault last year. But he's built a culture now where guys are willing to sacrifice social life. They're willing to sacrifice, time. They're willing to sacrifice effort in order to put the best basketball team together that they can. And I think they are going to be able to do that. And just being able to sit in a press conference and see that and hear that, I think is really impactful compared to what I've seen and you've seen in years past.
Griffin, the next topic is ambitious, I think, based on what we've seen. This would involve Indiana advancing as far in the NCAA tournament as they for the first time since 2002. Are you buying or selling as Indiana as an Elite Eight team or better in the 2023 NCAA tournament?
This is where it's tough because I like the ranking question. These questions I struggle with because, in my opinion, NCAA tournament is 100% dependent on who you draw, especially when you get to that Sweet 16 Elite Eight range.
Yep.
If you get into a regional, Indiana, let's say they're the 2 or 3 seed. Well, if you're going against let's say North Carolina continues a stretch where they're number one, they're top 3 for the remainder of the year. I think North Carolina can be a lot like what Louisville was in 2013, where they come off, a great finish to the previous year, come back, they bring back a lot of talent, and they just look to run the table. If Indiana's the 3 seed in a division with North Carolina, that's going to be a tough opponent to get through in the Elite Eight or the Sweet 16. So I have them as a Sweet 16 team right now. I think that's
you're selling.
I'm selling it. I think that might change, but for right now they are a Sweet 16 team, and I would say they are closer to a round of 32 exit. Given what we know about them right now, this can change, but given what we know about them right now, I would be closer to saying they're a 32 team than a Elite Eight team. I just think they have too much to prove.
I agree with that completely. So maybe as a follow-up to that, do you think people, our fans, would be happy with the Sweet 16 based on the preseason expectations? That's the one thing I worry about with all of this preseason hype with Indiana basketball this year. If they come out this season and they're a top 15 team and they make the Sweet 16 and they're in the Big Ten hunt, I think people should be thrilled with that based on where things have been in recent seasons. But I also wonder, as these expectations, they've been as high as 6 and 7, and some of these, I think Andy Katz had them as the 7th best team. When you start getting into that territory, it's hard to live up to that. And I wonder with IU's fan base if they're going to be happy if they just make the Sweet 16. What do you kind of know this program very well? You grew up in Indiana. You followed the program for a long time. What do you think the reaction is going to be if Indiana is just, and I put that in quotes because I think based on where this program has been, going to the Sweet 16 would be a really good accomplishment this season. But I just worry that maybe the expectations have gone a little bit too far. And if Indiana doesn't have a deep tournament run, people could be a little disappointed.
This brings up a really, really important topic. And I think this reminds me a lot. And we saw this for the first time have a huge impact with Maryland basketball less than a year ago, with Mark Turgeon retiring out of the blue. And it came out just kind of like, he was sick of the expectation. He put together a competent basketball team every year. They very, very rarely had a rebuilding year, and they were consistently in the tournament, and fans were never satisfied. It's a little different with Indiana just because Indiana is a little bit of a bigger basketball brand than Maryland. But fans, with Indiana basketball, there's a lot of diehards that want to be in the college basketball conversation that think Indiana basketball needs to be in the same level as Duke and UNC and Kansas and Kentucky. And given the past 20 years, Indiana's just not there. They just have not been there as a program. They have not proven they can be there. They've had coaches in and out, and that's fine. All programs go for that stage. Indiana has been able to maintain some form of relevancy, But I think the battle for Indiana and where Indiana fans should want Mike Woodson to go is continue to be relevant. And that starts with staying in the top 25 throughout an entire season and then building again for the next season and the next season. You know, I think Tom Crean did a great job of building a team for 2 years. And then he needed like a year or two to rebuild and then build another team for 2 years and then need a year or two. That just can't happen. You need to be able to consistently win 22 games a year, be able to consistently be in the college basketball conversation, constantly be in Sweet 16s, and just constantly be rotating great players in and out of your program. It doesn't need to be one and done guys. It can be 4-year guys. It can be 3-year guys. It can be 2-year guys. It can be 1-year guys. I think the best college basketball teams have a mix of the four. That being said, I think the other thing I want to point out for Indiana fans at home who might be listening, go back to 2 years ago when Archie Miller was fired. And everyone was excited thinking, oh, maybe Brad Stevens, maybe Chris Beard, maybe Musselman, maybe, going through the list of names that Indiana could possibly land. They land on Mike Woodson, which had kind of a mixed reaction from fans and media. Look at where Indiana is now. Is this not your ideal situation 2 years ago when they brought in Mike Woodson? Is this not better than where you thought the program can be? Because I can sit here and say this is much better than I expected. And yes. I think that is the important thing to keep in mind. This is going to plan. It's actually going better than the plan suggested. Recruiting is hot for a guy who everyone said, well, is he going to be able to recruit? I can assure you Mike Woodson can recruit. Bottom line, it's working. And I think Indiana fans should be satisfied with that. Whether it's a round of 32 exit would be a bummer for the standpoint of the hype. But if Indiana's competing with Big Ten teams all year long, finds a big win against Arizona and or Kansas, able to win at home against a really, really good North Carolina team and is able to be in the college basketball conversation all year long, that is something that is successful.
Right.
Tournament teams lose all the time. We saw Purdue lose. How many great Purdue teams have we seen lose in the tournament? But by golly, Purdue's still relevant in college basketball, right? Despite, not being in the Final Four forever. They're still relevant. They're still a team that you want to watch. They're still a fun team to watch because they put together these good teams every single year. That's where Indiana wants to go. I think they want to stay relevant. And I think fans need to adjust the expectations a little bit to that of, hey, they're good. That's exciting that they're good. We can get excited that they're going to be good. But let's make sure we're aligning with, hey, if they're 16, they're not 1. If they're ranked 16th in the country, they're not number 1. And there's a reason for that. There are 15 teams that are also very good that they think is better than Indiana. And I think that's important to remember.
I really think once you get in the NCAA tournament too, if you're a top 4 seed, the expectation obviously is you win your first game. But after that, if you're a 4 seed, you're playing a 5 seed the second game. I mean, that's a 50-50 game in most cases. So after you get past that first game, I think a lot of it, as you mentioned earlier, is based on matchups and who you play and how teams are playing. If the team came in hot from their conference tournament, you have upsets. So I'm not trying to kind of rain on the parade of the fans and make them think that, Indiana couldn't have a deep run. I just think that when you start to see things like, is this a top 10 team? Then people automatically think, oh, Final Four. And that's really hard to do. It's why Indiana hasn't done it for so long. They haven't had the right pieces in place. They haven't really had the right coach to do that. I mean, Tom Crean, as you mentioned, had a lot of great seasons. He produced a ton of great NBA players. He was never able to get, in Mike Woodson's famous phrase, over that hump, right, of getting the program back to where it aspires to be based on the expectations on a year-on-year basis. So I think really this season, Indiana just needs to take a step forward. And a step forward is getting into the tournament, winning a game, and putting yourself in a position to advance further. I think that's really all you can ask for. 2-part question here on the next. Go ahead, Griffin.
I was just going to say, people like to, say, oh, Indiana can't get past the Sweet 16 team. Look at Tom Crean's 3 Sweet 16 opponents. Who have they been? They've been teams that have gone on to, if not the Final Four, the national championship game. So it's not like Indiana's getting upset in the Sweet 16 to a team that then gets killed in the Elite Eight. Like, Indiana's losing to good teams in the Sweet 16. So, and not to mention, two of those teams are considered two of the best college basketball teams of all time. And then a Syracuse team that just got really, really hot at the end of the year. So I think, for Indiana fans, it's not that you can't get past the Sweet 16. You just got really unlucky with the teams you had to face. And that's just the way the tournament works. That's what we love about the tournament. So I think it's, like I said, readjusting that vision, seeing the fact that this is a good team, but this is a good team that you can't jump from step 4 to step 10. You got to go to step 6 and step 7 and 8 before you get there. So they're getting there. It just takes time.
So two-parter here. Are you buying TJD as Big Ten Player of the Year? And are you buying Jalen Hood-Schifino as Big Ten Freshman of the Year? I'll just tell you, I'm buying one of these and selling one of these. I'll let you know which after you answer.
I'll buy TJD. I just think the Player of the Year is largely media based, and a lot of coaching based as well. I just think it's built for him. Coming back for a senior season, I think is a great story, and I think it's his award to lose. I'll put it that way. I think if he does similar to what he did last year, I think he'll be fine winning that award. As for Jalen Hood-Schifino, correct me if I'm wrong here, we don't even know if this kid's started yet. So I have him in my starting lineup, but this is a kid who's still trying to earn a spot. And, we've seen kids come in and we've seen really good freshmen come in. There is a learning curve. I think he's very talented, being one of the best freshmen in the Big Ten. There are going to be programs that are relying on their freshmen to lead the team. Indiana's not one of them. So I don't think they're going to be relying on Jalen Hood-Schifino. So I'm going to sell that. I just think he's going to be very good for Indiana. He's going to be one of the best freshmen in the conference, but he's not going to be the best freshman in the conference.
So I went the opposite as you did. I sold TJD, and that's not because I don't think he's going to be better than last year or that I don't believe he's a great player. I think he is. I think Hunter Dickinson was better last year. I know TJD got the better of him in that Big Ten tournament matchup, but every other meeting that they had head-to-head before that, Hunter Dickinson outplayed him. Michigan, that was the first time Indiana, I think, had beaten Michigan since Tom Crean was the coach. There's just something about Dickinson's game that I think is a little bit more versatile. I think it's his ability to step out into the perimeter, a little bit more dominant, I feel like, at times than TJD. So I'll take Hunter Dickinson as my Big Ten Player of the Year this year. And I'm going to take Jalen Hood-Schifino as Big Ten Freshman of the Year. And that's based on the fact that everything that I've heard from people who have watched this team practice, who have been close to off-season workouts, have said a lot of great things just about his impact. And you look at him at Big Ten Media Day and you watch video of him, his body is college ready. He's 6'6", 215 pounds. He played in a high school program last year that was playing against the best of the best in the country. I think he's going to be ready for the physicality of the Big Ten. And the other thing is, you look at the Big Ten, and this has kind of been the reason the league hasn't won a national championship since 2000. The incoming talent in the Big Ten, I don't think there's a single McDonald's All-American coming into the league. A lot of those players are going to the SEC and the ACC and the Big 12. I think he's the most talented player freshman-wise coming into the league. And maybe his stats won't be as as plentiful as some of the other freshmen that come in, maybe on worse teams. But I think playing on the stage at Indiana and finishing on a team it should be in the top 2 or 3 in the conference, I think will be enough for him to get that award. So that'll be interesting. I think both of those guys are going to be very important pieces to the puzzle for Indiana. His chances to win the Big Ten. TJD, he's got to raise his game just another level beyond what we saw last year. I don't think he can be the exact same player in Indiana, win the Big Ten. And Hood-Schifino, let's face it, Indiana's counting on him to be an upgrade over what they had last year in Parker Stewart in that spot. He was basically a stationary shooter that couldn't create anything for anybody else on the court. And having Hood-Schifino with Xavier Johnson, I think changes things in the backcourt in terms of having another playmaker and a guy that can score in a variety of ways.
I agree 100%. I think he's definitely an improvement from last year. I just think it will be interesting to see. I just don't know if they're going to need him as much as other teams are going to need freshmen, and that's
right.
where I'm kind of Big Ten freshman of the year.
So last one, and this is obviously something that's been talked about a lot the last couple of weeks, but I'm going to frame it as returning next season. So I'm not saying off in the distance. Are you buying and selling the Indiana-Kentucky series returning as early as next season?
So here's the thing with that. Yes, they're talking about it coming back. I feel like we've also talked about it coming back, in 2017 and 2019 and 2021. I think it's something both schools want back. I think what's tough, and I'll say this to be critical of Cal. Cal does not want to play a true road game. I mean, he's going to Gonzaga and he's going to play at a convention center, minutes away from Gonzaga's campus, but he does not want to play it on the campus. And that to me is just, that's not college basketball at all. That's just not how college basketball works. It's fine to go play invitationals and have it be that way. Go play in Maui and have it be that way. But the road environments, especially in a Kentucky IU basketball series, where the fans are the backbone of that series. I said it last week. I was like, what makes an Indiana-Kentucky series so great? It does not matter if Kentucky and Indiana are the royalty of college basketball, or both are 500. It's a great game because both those fan bases love college basketball more than any other level of basketball in the world. It's just, that is their lifeblood. That's their go-to. That's what they live, breathe, and die by. It would be great for college basketball and both these programs to have this series back because it is a fun series to play. That being said, I think the idea of losing campus sites is not a great thing for anybody. And if you're going to play neutral site, where are you going to play that neutral site game? Are you going to play it in Indianapolis? Because that's going to give an immediate. Excuse me. Wow.
It's the Ohio Valley allergies are finally taking hold, Griffin.
Oh, they've taken hold a lot this fall. Believe me, they have. Where's this? If they're saying neutral site and campus site, I'm not really sure how that works. So are you going to say, hey, you guys can come play at Rupp, but we're not going to play at Assembly Hall? Because I don't think that's really a great deal for Indiana. And then the other deal is, what, you're going to play in Indianapolis? Okay, that's going to give an advantage to Indiana. Oh, what's the neutral site going to be? KFC, you're going to play at the Yum Center? So I just don't really, and it was like, okay, go to Chicago. Well, that's just totally out of the way for both fan bases. So I'm interested to see exactly how this is going to work. But like I said, I think it's best for both schools to bring this series back, do it home and home, do it so both fan bases get to witness these games being played in home arenas, because that is when this series is at its absolute best. And bring back the bitter blue chip rivalry, because this is, like I said, this is what college basketball is built on. These are two programs that I think have heralded history, similar backgrounds between, what's so great about Indiana and Kentucky is there's a lot of people who don't go to either school or have gone to either school, but still root for both schools as diehard fans. And that's just the culture. That's the way it works in this part of the country. And I just think these are two programs that desperately should play and should have some great matchups in the future. And I think Mike Woodson is willing to do anything possible to get this back. I hope he doesn't compromise and say, yeah, sure, we'll come play at Rupp and then we can play at, Gainbridge Fieldhouse, because I just don't think that's really a compromise. That's Coach Cal getting whatever he wants. So, and I think if you set that tone early, give a mouse a cookie, what's going to happen? So
I think the one thing that people aren't thinking about with this potentially is if the series gets set up in a way where maybe it doesn't start for a few years and you do a 4-year deal where there's 2 campus site games and 2 neutral site games. Kentucky could put the campus site game in Bloomington at the end, let's say in 2027 or 2028. Calipari might not be the coach by then. I don't know what the shelf life is for him at Kentucky. So maybe UK sets it up in that way and says, okay, we'll do it, knowing that there's not a likelihood that Calipari is there in 5 or 6 years. So I think that's another way that it could be put together. I don't think it's going to happen as early as next season, but I do think whenever we can get the game back on the schedule is a positive development for college basketball, especially in this part of the country. I mean, to me, this is the best market in the country for college basketball, Southern Indiana, Louisville area, because you have all these 3 programs, and even the Indiana-Louisville series, I think is something that there's going to be an appetite for, given the friendship of Kenny Payne and Mike Woodson and their time together at the Knicks. I think that's another series that needs to get back on the schedule. Griffin, before we let you go, I just wanted to ask you briefly, since you've covered the program quite a bit this season. It's been a bit of a roller coaster. IU football. Where do things go from here the rest of the season? And what's the future look like? I've had people on the Inside the Hall community. There's a little bit of football discussion on there. People talking about Tom Allen's buyout and all these things already. And is it time to move on from Tom Allen? I mean, the numbers, if you look at that, are astronomical in terms of moving on to different coach. So I don't think that happens anytime soon. I'm just kind of curious, is there anything that can be done to salvage the rest of the season? And what is there any reason to be optimistic about the future of IU football?
I'll say this. I would be optimistic for a couple of reasons. One, say what you want. Go watch a game last year compared to this year and tell me the offense is not a little bit better. Because I guarantee you it is at least a little more fun to watch than it was last year at this time. There are head-scratching plays on the offensive side, but I think largely the offensive side of the ball has gotten a little bit better. The issue is the defensive side of the ball has taken a massive step back. And guess what? You lose Micah McFadden, you're probably going to do that. What's concerning to me is the defensive secondary has been one of the worst I've seen under the Tom Allen era. So that is a huge concern, because that is Tom Allen's wheelhouse. That is something Tom Allen coaches directly and is directly in charge of. I'm not really sure what's going on there. That being said, do you really want Tom Allen gone, or do you want, a fresh start and a new start to this year? Because any other coach in America you go get, and this is where I'm, very hesitant on the Tom Allen contract discussion. Good luck finding a coach who's going to get this excited for Indiana football, who isn't going to leave at the first bit of success he has with Indiana football. I mean, look at what's happening with Leipold right now at Kansas. Kansas has one good year of football. They're not even – they've lost 2 straight. So this actually might not be a great year of football, but they have one good year. This guy's already being tied to 4 other jobs. And that's just something that Indiana football is going to have to deal with until it's actually a football school, which it's not ever probably going to be. So I think for me, I'm sitting back and like, okay, you got a coach who wants to be here, who does not want any other job in the country, who has proven he can have success. You have a coach who can get players to buy into a culture, which is one of the hardest things to do as a head coach of any Division I program. So players are still buying into the LEO, whether fans are or not, he doesn't really care. Players are still buying into it. Players still believe they can compete with anybody. And I think they've shown they can compete with a lot. Michigan had played a terrible half of football, but Indiana was with Michigan, and Indiana probably should have been up at the halftime, not tied. I'm optimistic because I think there's a lot of young talent. I think there's a lot of talent that's going to be back next year that will be better. I think Indiana is going to benefit when divisions go away here in a couple of years. Once USC and UCLA get in, I'm being told by people that they're planning on divisions being gone completely, which benefits everyone in the Big Ten East, not just Indiana. So I think people calling for the buyout, first of all, guys, the buyout's too much. Indiana needed help to pay Archie's buyout, and that's a program everyone cares about. This is a program that's just not on the same tier as basketball, and it's double what Archie's buyout was. So it's not going to get paid for $20 million. It's just not. It's not worth it for Indiana. And my question is, who do you guys want to go get? I mean, who are you guys going to go get that's going to have an impact? Because I promise you, any new coach you go get is going to take 3 years, where Allen might take a year and a half to figure out and get things back on track. So keep in mind, when Allen became head coach, it took, I'll say this and then I'll shut up, but this is an offensive and defensive staff that has had a lot of shuffling over the past 2 years. Before 2020, Allen had a consistent staff for the most part, going from 2017, which was his first full season, until 2020. That's 3 years with the same group of guys. He's had a complete staff switch since 2020 of basically everyone in new positions. He has to rebuild some kind of relationship, some kind of recruiting momentum, some kind of understanding with these coaches of how we're going to work. It took 3 years for them to get to a bowl game. When he first got here, they had to reset after 2021. It's probably going to take another 2 years to get back there, but I think they're on their way back. I think they're going to win one more game this year. I don't know where it's going to come from, but I think they still have one more win in them. And that doubles your total from 2021, which, love it or not, that's improvement. So I think it's getting there. It's going to be ugly, but guess what? It's a rebuilding year. It's a program that has to have them every once in a while. They're not Ohio State. They're not Michigan. My goal for Indiana is just go be Northwestern. Go be good once every 4 or 5 years, and you'll be set. So I think he can do that, and I'm still believing in it, but he's got a lot to prove.
One thing for me on IU football, which I do not cover, I've never been to a press conference. I've never sat in the press box. I barely watch the games. I will say this about Tom Allen. Last spring, every year, the coaches come down to Southern Indiana, and they have basically a barnstorming type tour event at Huber's Winery. It was canceled the last two years because of COVID. It came back this year. And before the event, Mike Woodson spoke to the media. Tom Allen spoke. I was just in the room, and I was eating my food from Huber's there, and Tom Allen brings this plate of food over and sits it right next to me. Talk to him for 10 or 15 minutes about all different kinds of things, not just football. And I will say, what you see from Tom, and this is my experience with him, and other people I think would back this up, what you see from Tom Allen in the media and what you see with his players, he's a genuinely good person. I mean, he seems like he, some people may criticize him for kind of being over the top with the LEO things and all that stuff, but I think that's the kind of person that you want leading your program. Have the results been disappointing these past couple seasons? Sure, but I agree with you a lot, Griffin, in that it's kind of be careful what you wish for, because sure, you could, say in a couple of years you're going to move on, and maybe that's what happens when the buyout goes down if the results haven't been good enough. But I also think that you have to understand where you are in the pecking order. And I know Indiana wants to move up, but it's going to be awfully hard in the Big Ten to do so. I think what needs to happen on a year in, year out basis is just try to improve and be a little bit better than the year before. You may have those years where you fall off, and that's going to happen. But I think Tom Allen is, just in terms of who he is as a person, is a great leader for the program. He sets a good example, I feel like, on and off the field. And for Indiana football, unless you're going to go write a blank check to a coach and say, this is what we're going to pay and we're going to do whatever it takes to win, and I just don't see that happening with the resources that are available, let's just see how it plays out over the next couple of years. And I think at this point, talking about making a change is just basically a pointless conversation. So that's all I'll say. We'll see how everything shakes out the rest of the season. I agree with you. Maybe they get another win or two, but they are a little bit better than last year, and they have improved in a few areas, but still a lot of room for growth.
You're also not going to spend $20 million to fire a head coach and then expect to get a top quality coach right after. There's just not enough money in the program. You couldn't do that with IU basketball, let alone IU football. So it's just not going to happen. And I think it really is important for IU to believe and find consistency and find their place in the Big Ten, given that all the change that's coming to college athletics as a whole and how important football is money-wise. I know Indiana is one of the few programs in the country that makes more money from its basketball program than its football program, but it's still close. So football is still a big moneymaker. It's important for Indiana to be relevant. And at the very end of the day, Tom Allen, will say what you will about him as a football coach. He's a great marketer, and he's a great, person and ambassador for Indiana and the program as a whole. So I think he's going to be okay for I think he could be terrible for the rest of this year. He could probably be terrible next year and still be fine. So I think, he's going to have some growth, and I think he's going to develop players like we've seen him do. But it's going to take time, and you got to be patient.
You can follow him on Twitter at Griff Gonzo. That's GRIF, and then Gonzo, GONZO. Nice. I like the Twitter handle there, Griffin. You can also, if you're in the Southern Indiana Louisville market, I'll say this, and if you're looking for IU coverage on local TV news down here, it's not even close in terms of WDRB. The other stations, I think to them at times it's annoying that IU even exists or that they have to cover them. But you look, if you're not from this part of the state, Southern Indiana, New Albany, Jeff, all the way up to Seymour, there's a ton of communities that there's a lot of IU fans, and WDRB, I'd say does as a much better job than a lot of the other stations here of giving IU coverage. And I know Griffin's done a great job so far this fall covering IU football. I know he hopes to have some IU basketball coverage as well. So definitely check them out if you're in the Southern Indiana Louisville market. Griffin, thanks for coming on. As for Podcast on the Brink, we will be back next week with another episode. If you enjoy the show, please give us a rating or a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, and we will talk to you again next week on another episode of Podcast on the Brink.